This is Professor Douglas Young. He's one of London's leading TB specialists.
Tuberculosis is a highly infectious organism. It spreads in the atmosphere, so we have to make sure that none of the tuberculosis bacteria that we're working with in the laboratory can possibly escape. We're entering now into an airlock. On the other side of this door, we have negative air pressure, so all the air is being sucked into the laboratory, preventing any escape of the bacteria into the outside environment.
This year alone, 8 million people will catch TB. Every second, someone in the world is infected. The only condition under which Professor Young is allowed to work with the TB bacteria is in a high-security Category 3 containment laboratory. Only here can he be sure that the bacteria cannot escape, for once out in the open, TB is deadly.
It seems to have learned how to trick the body's initial defense mechanisms. So whereas normally we would respond to bacteria very quickly and eliminate them, Mycobacterium tuberculosis has developed ways that it can overcome the body's initial defense and set up a primary infection.
For over 300 years, India has battled the TB bacteria. This is the Mandar Sanatorium in Rajasthan. It was built in 1906 and is one of the oldest TB sanatoriums in India. The belief was that fresh air could cure you. It can't, and many of the patients here never recovered from the disease. Today, just a few kilometres from Mandar, lies Ajmer Hospital. Almost a century after the sanatorium was built, TB remains a widespread killer in India. It is home to a quarter of all the world's TB cases, and somebody dies from TB here every minute of every day. To cope with the high number of patients, Ajmer Hospital has 2 wards dedicated to TB. Dr. Sudhir Khanna is making his daily rounds of the patients. He examines each in turn, but he knows not to expect any speedy recoveries.
Tuberculosis is a slow killer. It is very deadly at times, and I think it is one of the most fearsome disease in all developing countries, causing a number of deaths and loss of working hours all over the world. The usually presenting symptom of any patient of tuberculosis is cough, which is of usually more than 20-25 days. At times they are spitting, and the spit may contain even blood. Then there can be fever, there can be loss of appetite, weight loss, evening rise of temperatures they usually have, and they feel weak and as if they have lost their strength and vigor.
Like the common cold, TB spreads through the air. People with pulmonary TB spread the disease when they cough, sneeze or spit, or just by talking. You need only inhale a few germs to catch the disease, and while your immune system can stave off TB, it can't kill the germs. As soon as the immune system is weakened, the TB springs into action. This is what is happening at the moment all over Africa. The explosion of HIV has meant a resurgence of TB.
My name is Dr. Adpere Capito, and I work here. I'm one of the staff working here in TB ward. This is Queen Elizabeth Central Hospital.
Here in Blantyre in Malawi, over 80% of patients admitted to the TB ward are also HIV positive. Somebody suffering from HIV has a weaker immune system, and this makes it much easier for the TB bacteria to take hold. Dr. Capito considers the 2 diseases to be inseparable.
In our setting and in this hospital, I mean, that's the first thing you have to think about when you see a TB patient, when you see TB patients, because we already know, and from previous research and experience, we know most of them, they are also HIV positive.
Before the HIV pandemic hit Malawi, only around 100 people a year were catching TB. Now there are 28,000 new TB patients, and of these, 8,000 will die every year. That's 22 TB deaths every day.
In most cases, what we usually see is that patients, they come even later on during this illness, and you find that they are very sick. And because of that, even if when we start giving them treatment, you find that maybe they're not responding adequately. So that's the problem which we are facing with this AIDS pandemic. And the prognosis most of the times is not very good. Yeah.
There have been very few advances towards finding new drugs to combat the increasing cases of TB. Back in London, Professor Young faces all manner of obstacles in his research to find new treatments.
One of the great difficulties in working with tuberculosis is that the bacteria grow very slowly. Typically in the lab, we're used to dealing with bacteria like E. coli, which will replicate itself every 20 minutes. Now, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, by contrast, will only double every 24 hours, so it's growing extremely slowly. So when I plate out TB bacteria on this plate, I'll need to come back next month before I'll see anything growing.
Always TB's most effective weapon to overcome. The bacteria can lie dormant in the body until they recognize a good time to strike.
So although we may have a drug that will kill the bacteria when they're in this actively growing form, that drug may not be effective against the form that the bacteria are in when they're sitting in our lungs.
Biru Biwa is a Rajasthani farmer. He has had a persistent cough for over 3 weeks, the first sign of TB. Biru has picked a bad day to visit the local health centre. It's the weekly eye clinic today and Dr. Khanna's surgery is packed. Finally, Biru gets his turn. But diagnosing TB is not straightforward. Biru will have to undergo further tests.
To be sure that he is suffering from pulmonary tuberculosis, he will be subjected to sputum examination because that is a specific and a cost-effective test which he can undergo. We will be taking 3 samples. One will be taken right now, another will be an overnight sample, and third will be the sample which we will be giving tomorrow.
The sputum test involves taking samples of Biru's spit, for it is in his saliva that the TB bacteria can be seen. The TB bacteria is so difficult to detect that the lab technician needs 3 samples over 3 days. The technician makes up slides from the spit. It's a lengthy procedure. The sample has to be stained and washed over and over again. The excess water is removed and then the slides are dried. Finally, the technician views them under the microscope. He must study each sample very carefully to detect the TB bacteria. It is a time-consuming process, and in the meantime, all Biru can do is wait.
I'm Edson from Kunama. I'm doing business within here in Blantyre. I'm married. I've got 3 daughters. Unfortunately, I found that I'm affected with TB.
Once diagnosed with TB, a patient starts treatment immediately. And although there has been no new class of TB drug developed since the 1960s, there is now a new treatment regime. It is called DOTS, Directly Observed Therapy Short Course, and 3 million TB patients worldwide are successfully treated every year. Its aim is to make sure that patients are monitored when taking their drugs. This is because the course of treatment is long and the number of pills is high.
This time I'm taking 11 drugs in 3 types, and I'm supposed to drain it for 8 months.
Miss a few pills or end the treatment early and the TB bacteria survives to kill. Each time Edson takes the drugs, his wife must oversee him and record it. But for Edson, TB is not the only worry.
At first I discovered that I'm HIV positive before I discovered that I'm affected with the TB. I went for the medical checkup where I discovered that I'm affected with the HIV positive.
Bodies battling with HIV immediately have a weakened immune system, and this opens the door to TB.
HIV will reduce our immune response, and those individuals who had been happily sitting with Mycobacterium tuberculosis, doing them no harm at all, now lose their immune response and go on and develop active disease. So this synergy, we would call it, between HIV and tuberculosis is a major problem for global health.
And that makes the hunt for new drugs all the more urgent. Every year, 128,000 people catch TB in Rajasthan. 70% of them will get the DOTS treatment, and this has meant that the death rate is down. But still, 20,000 of the TB sufferers here will die. Biru is returning to the health centre for the 2nd day running. He carries with him his 2nd sputum sample. The 3rd will be taken when he arrives in the hope of a conclusive diagnosis. But it isn't so clear-cut. Biru's report says that all his samples are TB negative, but this contradicts all his symptoms. The next step then is an X-ray. And here, sure enough, are the telltale signs of a TB sufferer. Biru has spots on his lungs. The dual tools of TB diagnosis, sputum sampling and the X-ray, haven't been improved upon for decades and cannot offer a conclusive diagnosis. The dilemma then is whether or not to put Biru on DOTS, for it is still uncertain if he actually has TB. And again, he must wait. Edson is on his way to his local health centre, where he has an appointment with Dr. Capito. This is Blantyre's Nirandi Township Market, where Edson works. He runs a shoe stall here, making just enough money to pay his rent and feed his family. Luckily for Edson, the market is close to a health centre. This makes it much easier for him to collect drugs and to see a doctor. But while Edson has been able to get onto DOTS, many of the poorest members of his community still find it difficult to get treatment for TB. The poorer you are, the harder it is to get access to drugs, even the free drugs like DOTS. This means that up to half of all infectious TB cases remain undetected in the poorest communities. Many TB victims never even start DOTS and continue to transmit the infection to others before dying. Edson has HIV and TB, but still he's one of the lucky ones.
The drugs will start killing the bacteria very quickly, so within the first few hours they'll be killing a significant number of bacteria. When you treat a tuberculosis patient, after a couple of weeks of treatment, they'll no longer be coughing up large numbers of bacteria. They will essentially be non-infectious for the general population. However, they will at that stage still have the disease in their lungs, so we still need to continue treatment.
If a patient doesn't finish their DOTS or doesn't have access to the correct combination of drugs, then the TB can resurface. Here, the yellow rods are the TB bacteria. They have attacked and invaded the red immune cells. Not only will the patient fall ill again, but further complications can also occur.
The way that the DOTS treatment is organised is that you take multiple drugs simultaneously, and we know you have to do that. If you take a single drug, the bacterium very quickly becomes resistant to that single drug, and we get drug resistance problems. With the DOTS treatment, if you don't implement DOTS properly, if you get a shortfall in one or other drug, you then run the risk of selecting for those drug-resistant strains. These are now posing a major problem of what we call multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, whereby the bacteria now are simply completely resistant to our standard DOTS treatment.
Vero still doesn't know for sure if he has TB. So before he can start the DOTS treatment, he is first put on a course of antibiotics for 2 weeks. Only if these fail to clear up his chest will it be certain that he has TB and not another type of infection. If the antibiotics do fail, this will mean that about 6 weeks will have passed between the symptoms starting and the treatment beginning. 6 weeks in which Biru could be infecting others with TB. He is sent home to wait and see if he gets better. Meanwhile, his spit samples, along with those of the scores of others who visit the health centre every week with symptoms just like his, are burnt. Biru, who may have infectious TB, goes back into the community. But the sealed samples are thought to be too contagious to be thrown away. They must be destroyed. Narandi Township Health Centre is always busy and the patients often desperate. Edson waits to see Dr. Capito. For the last few months, his left hand and both his feet have been swollen. Edson is frightened and wants to know what is causing the swellings. Edson is suffering from Kaposi sarcoma, a form of cancer often seen amongst HIV patients.
His immune system is low at the moment because he has HIV. He's got TB and also he has Kaposi sarcoma. So that's a definition of AIDS.
Edson is being treated for TB because DOTS is free, but the drugs needed to treat AIDS, known as ARVs, are costly and Edson cannot afford them. His immune system, therefore, will remain weak, a prime target for future TB infections. 20% of all AIDS patients treated for TB will relapse with tuberculosis, and it is the TB that kills them.
I can say the prognosis is not that good, but sometimes you find that maybe people, they can live up to 5 years, even like in his state, they can live up to 2, 3, 5 years, even if when they are not on ARVs.
I know that I'm not going to stay for a long time. Then I was very much concerned. I tried to think this and this. Anyway, I forced myself to be normal because there's nothing else which I can do. Then I'm just doing my things normally as I were doing. But I know I'm affected. Every morning when I wake up, I just kneel down and praise the Lord to add up my days. Maybe if He can add up me 5 or 6 years, my children, by that time maybe they'll be a little bit grown up. Yeah. But right now, I'm trying my level best what to do to stay for a long time.
Back in London, Professor Young is all too aware of the need to find new drugs and diagnostic tools to fight TB. New tactics that could help patients like Viru and Edson.
I think what we're going to have to do is make better drugs. I think that's beginning to be feasible at this level of science that we've reached now. I think in tandem with that, we have to think about vaccines. We have to think of ways of preventing people getting tuberculosis in the first place. I think we also need to think of better ways of diagnosing people once they develop the disease. And I think it's going to be a combination of these 3 new routes: better drugs, new vaccines, better diagnostics. I think a combination of those is the way forward for global tuberculosis control.